He rejected me right there at the blind date. Then the CEO stood up and said, "Then I'll take her." I still remember the cold silence that filled the restaurant the moment he turned away, his eyes avoiding mine like I was invisible. The blind date I had nervously agreed to, hoping for a fresh start, had instantly become a nightmare. My heart pounded, my hands trembling as I tried to smile through the humiliation. Everyone's eyes seemed to burn into me, their pity and judgment weighing like a heavy curtain. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the shadows and never come back. But before I could retreat, the room shifted. A confident voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Then I'll take her." The CEO, standing tall in his sleek suit, had risen from his seat. All heads turned toward him, surprised, stunned, and suddenly silent. He approached me, offering a hand steady and sure, a lifeline amid the chaos. I looked up, searching his eyes for reassurance, and found it there. Warmth, protection, and something deeper. That moment changed everything. It wasn't just about being chosen. It was about being seen when everyone else looked away. I realized then that sometimes the most unexpected people show up when you need them most. And for me, that night was just the beginning. After the CEO's words echoed through the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted completely. The stunned silence was replaced by whispers and sideways glances. But this time they weren't directed at me with judgment. They were filled with surprise and curiosity. The blind date who had rejected me looked away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Meanwhile, the CEO's confidence filled the room like a protective shield. He led me to a different table, away from the awkward stares and the cold shoulders. Sitting beside him, I felt a mixture of disbelief and relief. How could someone I barely knew stand up for me so fiercely? His presence was calming, a stark contrast to the embarrassment I had just endured. As we talked, his genuine interest and warm smiles began to dissolve my fear and doubt. For the first time that night, I laughed, not because everything was perfect, but because someone saw me as more than just a rejected date. The hours passed unnoticed as we shared stories, hopes and dreams, painting a picture of something new and unexpected. I realized that sometimes life's harshest moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings. That night wasn't just a rescue, it was a turning point. It was the moment I stopped feeling invisible and started believing in the possibility of being truly seen and valued. And as the evening drew to a close, I knew my life was about to change in ways I could never have imagined. As the night went on, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone else. The CEO listened, not just to my words, but to the silences between them. There was a kindness in his eyes that made me feel safe, a rare thing for someone who had just been publicly rejected. I thought about the contrast between him and the man who dismissed me moments before, how one could reduce me to nothing while the other saw my worth instantly. Around us, the restaurant buzzed with life, but I was in a bubble of calm, carried by the sincerity in his voice and the warmth of his hand resting lightly on mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Not the fleeting kind, but something steady and real. When the evening ended, he walked me to my car, promising to call me soon. I watched him disappear into the night, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. This wasn't just a story about rejection or rescue. It was the start of a new chapter, one where I would no longer wait in the shadows but step into the light. And as I closed the car door behind me, I whispered to myself, maybe this is how stories begin, with the courage to be seen. After the CEO stood up and declared, "Then I'll take her," the room's energy shifted dramatically. The sharp whispers and sideways glances that once made me feel invisible now felt different. Curious, cautious, and tinged with respect. The blind date, who had just rejected me, sat frozen, his expression a mix of embarrassment and disbelief, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The CEO led me away from the tense table to a quieter corner of the restaurant, where we could talk without the weight of judgment pressing down on us. Sitting beside him, I was overwhelmed by a strange mix of emotions, disbelief, relief, and a growing sense of hope. How could someone I barely knew stand up for me so boldly? His presence was a balm to my wounded spirit, and as we talked, his genuine interest and warm smiles slowly chipped away at the wall of fear I'd built around myself. For the first time that evening, I laughed, not because the situation was perfect, but because someone looked past the rejection and saw me. The hours passed unnoticed as we shared stories of our pasts, our dreams, and the possibilities that lay ahead. It was a moment of unexpected connection that shifted everything. I realized then that sometimes life's harshest moments are the prelude to the most beautiful beginnings. That night wasn't just a rescue. It was the start of something new, a chance to be truly seen and valued. As the evening deepened, our conversation grew more personal, weaving between laughter and quiet moments of reflection. The CEO shared stories about his childhood, how his family had high expectations, and how he often felt the pressure to be perfect. I told him about my own struggles with feeling invisible, how I always tried to blend in, afraid of standing out for the wrong reasons. In that softly lit corner, those walls came down, and for the first time I felt truly understood. His gaze was steady, his smile genuine, and in that moment, the loneliness I'd carried for so long began to fade. Around us, the gala continued, the clinking of glasses, the soft music, the chatter of guests. But it all felt distant, like a world we weren't part of anymore. Instead, there was only us, two people who had unexpectedly found solace in each other's company. I realized that sometimes the people who seem the most untouchable have their own vulnerabilities, and it's in sharing those vulnerabilities that real connections are made. By the end of the night, the embarrassment and rejection that had clouded my evening were replaced by a spark of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something meaningful. Walking out of the restaurant, hand in hand, I felt a new sense of strength and possibility. It wasn't just about the CEO's bold words. It was about finding someone who saw me, truly saw me for the first time. As the night came to a close, he walked me to my car under the soft glow of streetlights. The city around us was quiet, the usual hustle replaced by a calm stillness that matched the newfound peace I felt inside. He looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race and said, "I want to see you again, really see you." His words weren't just promises. They were a challenge and an invitation. I smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and cautious hope. The rejection from earlier felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by this unexpected connection that had blossomed in such a short time. We exchanged numbers, and as I watched him disappear into the night, I whispered to myself, maybe this is the start of something real. Driving home, I replayed the evening in my mind, the embarrassment, the rescue, the laughter, and the quiet moments of understanding. I knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear, but for the first time, I felt ready to face them. Not because I had someone to lean on, but because I had found my own strength reflected in his eyes. That night wasn't just about a blind date gone wrong. It was about new beginnings, courage, and the unexpected ways life can surprise us. And as I closed my eyes that night, I allowed myself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, my story was about to change. The days after that night were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. I found myself thinking about the CEO's words and the way he had looked at me, as if I were the only person in the world that mattered. At work, things shifted subtly. Colleagues who had once been indifferent now offered polite smiles, and the CEO began including me in more meetings, seeking my input with genuine interest. Despite this, I couldn't shake the lingering embarrassment of the blind date rejection. It felt like a wound that hadn't fully healed. One afternoon, the CEO surprised me by inviting me to lunch, a quiet moment away from the office buzz. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversation flowing easily, filled with laughter and quiet confessions. I realized that beneath the polished exterior, he was just as vulnerable as I was. Slowly, the walls I'd built around myself started to crumble. I began to believe that maybe I was worthy of being seen, of being chosen, not just as a convenient option, but as someone deserving of respect and love. That realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The world felt both bigger and smaller at the same time, a place of endless possibility, yet full of uncertainty. But with him by my side, I felt ready to take the next step, wherever it might lead. As the weeks went by, our connection deepened in ways I hadn't expected. The CEO wasn't just a powerful man in a sleek suit. He was someone who listened, who cared, who showed up even when life was complicated. We shared quiet dinners, long walks through the city streets, lit by neon signs, and endless conversations about dreams and fears. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments when doubts crept in, moments when I wondered if I was enough or if the past would catch up and unravel everything we were building. Yet, he never made me feel small or invisible. Instead, he reminded me of my worth, even when I couldn't see it myself. One evening, as we sat watching the city lights flicker below, he took my hand and said, "No matter what happens, I want you to know I'm here." Those words became a lifeline, a beacon in the storm. I started to believe in the possibility of love again, not the fairy tale kind, but the real, messy, beautiful kind. And though the future was uncertain, I felt a courage growing inside me, a courage to face whatever came next with him by my side. One evening, after a long day, he invited me to a quiet rooftop overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, and the world seemed to pause just for us. He looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen before and said, "I know life hasn't been easy, and I can't promise a perfect future, but I want to be part of your story, the real one with all its messiness." Those words hit me harder than any grand gesture ever could. I realized then that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, flaws and all. We talked for hours, sharing our fears, our dreams, and the weight of past mistakes. The city below glittered like a sea of possibilities, and in that moment, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. When I looked at him, I saw not just a CEO or a protector, but a partner, a person willing to walk beside me through the unknown. That night marked a turning point, not just in our relationship, but in how I saw myself. I was no longer defined by rejection or doubt, but by the courage to embrace love on my own terms. As we stood there, hand in hand, I whispered a silent promise to myself, to trust, to hope, and to never be afraid to be seen again. The days that followed felt like waking from a long, restless dream. I found myself navigating a world that was suddenly brighter and more hopeful, yet still tinged with uncertainty. The CEO and I continued to build our connection, each moment revealing layers of vulnerability and trust. He introduced me to friends and colleagues, standing proudly by my side as if to say, "This is who I choose." At work, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. The sting of past judgments softened, replaced by the warmth of acceptance. Yet the path wasn't always smooth. There were days when doubts crept in, whispers from the past, fears about the future. But each time, he reminded me gently that I wasn't alone. One afternoon, we took a walk in the park, the cherry blossoms beginning to bloom, a symbol of renewal and beauty. As petals drifted around us, he stopped and said, "No matter what comes, we face it together." Those words anchored me, giving me strength to embrace the unknown with courage. I realized that life isn't about waiting for perfect moments, but about creating them with the people who see your heart. And with him, I was ready to write a new story, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of tomorrow. As the weeks passed, our bond grew deeper and more real. We shared quiet mornings filled with soft conversation and laughter, and late nights where fears and hopes mingled in whispered confessions. The CEO wasn't just a figure of authority. He became my confidant, my partner in a journey that neither of us had expected, but both embraced wholeheartedly. We faced challenges together, from office politics to personal doubts, always finding strength in our connection. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, he took my hand and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." Those words settled deep in my heart, a reassurance that even amidst uncertainty, love could be a steady anchor. I found myself opening up in ways I never thought possible, sharing parts of me I had kept hidden for too long. With him, I learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was courage. Each day became a step forward, a new chapter unfolding with promise and possibility. And though the road ahead was still unknown, I faced it with hope, knowing that together we could overcome whatever came our way. One night, as the city lights twinkled below us, we found ourselves alone on the rooftop again, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. The weight of the past, the rejection, the doubts, the fears felt lighter somehow, softened by the trust we had built. He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the stars, and said, "You've changed my world." His words touched something deep inside me, a recognition of the journey we'd traveled together. I realized that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up, day after day, choosing each other even when life was messy. We talked long into the night, sharing dreams for the future and the hopes that kept us going. In that space, free from judgment and fear, I felt truly seen, not just by him, but by myself. The scars I carried weren't wounds to hide, but marks of survival and strength. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. That rooftop became a symbol of new beginnings, a place where past pain gave way to possibility. And with his hand in mine, I felt ready to step forward into a future defined not by rejection, but by love, resilience, and the courage to be seen fully and accepted completely. Months later, life settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and new. Kai Jr.'s laughter echoed through the apartment like a bright, steady light breaking through clouds. Watching him learn to crawl and then take his first steps filled me with a quiet joy I hadn't known before. The CEO and I maintained a cautious distance, communicating mostly through shared care routines and occasional messages about appointments and supplies. One evening, as he held our son for the first time without hesitation, he looked at me with softened eyes and said, "I don't want to miss any more moments." I nodded, understanding that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, slow, but possible. I still carried scars, the loss of my job, the betrayal, the loneliness of those early months. But now I carried hope. Hope that my son would know his worth isn't defined by the mistakes of others. Hope that he'd grow up seeing a mother who fought, not just for him, but for herself. One day, Kai Jr. will ask about his name. And when he does, I'll tell him everything, not just the pain, but the love, complicated, imperfect, and fiercely real, that made him who he is. Because in the end, it's not how a story begins, but how it's told. And I'm ready to tell ours with honesty, strength, and the voice I never lost. One quiet afternoon, while Kai Jr. napped, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures from before the pregnancy, candid moments with Kai at work events, blurry shots from company parties where we smiled but never spoke about what was happening beneath the surface. I realized how much of my life had been compartmentalized, hidden away in folders and memories I rarely revisited. Yet, here was my son, asleep in the next room, a living reminder that those chapters weren't the end of my story. I texted Kai something simple, "Thank you for showing up." His reply came quickly, learning every day. For him, it wasn't much, but it meant everything. That small exchange felt like a fragile bridge, unsteady but real. I don't know where this path will lead us. Maybe someday we'll heal enough to call each other family again. Maybe not. But the weight of the past no longer drags me down. I carry it with me, sure, but it doesn't define me. Instead, I choose the moments I create now, the laughter, the quiet mornings, the bedtime stories weaving our own narrative. And for the first time, I feel free. Not because the CEO recognized his son, nor because my name was cleared, but because I found my voice. And that voice will never be silenced again. The final moment of closure came unexpectedly on a rainy afternoon. A package arrived at my door, no sender's name, only my address written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a photo album filled with old, unseen pictures of Kai holding me during a company retreat, laughing with colleagues, and from the early days when we believed in something more. Alongside it was a brief, honest letter. I can't change the past, but I want to be part of his future. Thank you for naming him Kai. It means more than you know. Sitting on the floor with the album in my lap, the rain tapping softly against the windows, I felt a mix of sadness and peace. That was the last thread tying me to the man who once erased me. Not an apology or a promise, but a quiet acknowledgement. And for me, that was enough. I closed the album gently and looked over at Kai Jr., now playing with his blocks, his laughter filling the room. This story isn't about perfect endings or fairy tales. It's about survival, truth, and the messy, beautiful journey of reclaiming yourself. And as long as I have my voice and him, I know the future is ours to write, no matter what it holds.